Help me, brother! I fled to my brother's place in the middle of a freezing winter night, wearing ragged clothes. I was holding a baby in my arms. My brother was speechless at the sight of me, so changed. Thin and frail, clad only in a ragged thin shirt and barefooted. What on earth happened? He quickly brought me into the house and warmed up the room. The baby, wrapped in my jacket, was sound asleep, but I couldn't stop shivering. Who did this to my precious little sister? My brother muttered through clenched teeth. Lily, it's going to be okay now. Upon hearing my brother's gentle voice, I felt a wave of relief, as if all the strength had drained from my body. My name is Lily. I'm a 27-year-old homemaker with a young son. I was a nurse, but married Terry, who proposed to me. He is the son of the director of the hospital where I used to work and was handling administration there. Terry was working at a hospital. I was attracted to his kindness and his efficient work style. I have a brother who is 5 years older than me. The only family at my parents' home are my brother and my grandparents. In fact, when my brother was in 3rd grade and I was 4, our parents died in a car accident. They were hit head-on by a truck whose driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. My mother, a nurse, was working late, and it was when my father went to pick her up that the accident happened. My brother says he still remembers what our father said when he left to pick her up. Derek, I'm counting on you to take care of Lily. He probably said it casually, like, look after the house while I'm away and take care of your 4-year-old sister. But for my brother, it became unforgettable words. He often talks about it. I have never had a fight with my brother. After all, from when we were little to now that we are grown up, he has always tried his best to protect me. He's like a superhero to me. After our parents' accident, it seemed that my brother and I would be sent to separate foster homes, but our paternal grandparents, with whom we had not interacted much until then, came to take us in. When I first met our grandfather, he had white hair and a long bushy beard. He looked just like a Santa Claus out of a storybook. Seeing Derek, he muttered, "You're the spitting image of your father," and I believe I saw tears in his eyes. Our grandmother was a kind woman who hugged me tightly and sobbed, "Poor child." Later, I heard that our father had a falling out with our grandfather and left the family home in what amounted to running away. Grandfather wanted him to continue the family business, while our father wanted his freedom. Neither of them would yield, and they ended up parting on bad terms without keeping in touch. So Derek and I ended up moving to our grandparents' house, nestled in the rural mountains. Our grandfather was a renowned potter. His work was famous, and a single teacup could go for several thousands of dollars. Thanks to this, Derek and I were brought up without any financial difficulties. Our grandfather was stubborn, hated dishonesty, and dedicated himself completely to his work. Our grandmother was incredibly kind. Even though our parents were no longer with us, under the watchful eyes of our grandparents, we grew up happily. Derek went off to a prestigious university in the city, while I attended nursing school. We both had the chance to follow our dreams. But then our grandmother's health deteriorated. Derek, who had been working in the city, returned home. I wanted to return too, but as I was still a student, Derek advised against it. Derek has always been interested in our grandfather's work, but has been firmly told to follow his own path, which led him to attend university. I think our grandfather must have regretted forcing our deceased father to continue the family business, and didn't want his grandchildren to go through the same thing. However, Derek insisted on being taught pottery by our grandfather. He had always been handy, so pottery was a good fit for him. Besides, Derek was good at everything: academics, sports, and he was popular amongst his friends. He was truly a superhero. He took care of our sick grandmother while learning the trade from our grandfather. After I graduated from nursing school, I started working as a nurse. That's when I was proposed to by Terry, and we got married. We had a grand wedding, and the joyous smiles of Derek and our grandfather are what I remember the most. Derek brought pictures of our parents to the wedding. "We all just want you to be happy, Lily, including our late mom and dad," he said, shedding tears openly. Our grandmother, who was too ill to attend the wedding, cried tears of joy when she saw the video of the ceremony. I was truly blessed with a great family. I quit my job as a nurse, moved into my husband Terry's family home, and began to support him as a full-time homemaker. We had a child, my husband was kind, and we were living a happy life. But then, until that time, my life had seemed all smooth sailing. I, at the time, couldn't even imagine the hellish days that were to come. Not long after, my grandmother passed away. Terry attended the funeral with me and comforted me. My grandfather's disappointment was so severe, I couldn't even speak to him. While supporting our grandfather, my brother Derek immersed himself more and more into his pottery. Half a year passed since then. "Help me, brother!" I fled to my brother's place in the middle of a freezing winter night, wearing ragged clothes. I was holding a baby in my arms. Upon seeing my drastically changed appearance, Derek was at a loss for words. I was so skinny and weak, just wearing a thin, tattered shirt and barefooted. "What on earth happened?" He quickly let me in and warmed up the room. The baby wrapped in my coat was sound asleep, but I couldn't stop shivering. "Who did this to my dear sister?" Derek murmured, clenching his teeth. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as if all strength had left my body. I didn't want to worry Derek or our grandfather, but I had no choice but to tell them. I began to recount the events at my in-laws' house. Terry and I were living together, but due to my in-laws' concern that I should rest during and after pregnancy, we moved into their house. My in-laws were both remarried, and Terry was the stepson of my mother-in-law. They seemed like a genuinely close family. I was happy that I and my child could become part of this family. My father-in-law was kind to me. He told me to make yourself at home, and I really appreciated his kindness. Since I had no father, his kindness was even more precious to me. However, my mother-in-law seemed not to like this. "You're flirting with my husband, aren't you? You disgusting woman," she suddenly began to say. She started harassing me when my father-in-law was not around. "You're an uneducated child with no parents. You don't qualify as a wife. We are not of the same status." As she says, not just verbally abusing me, but also causing physical harm, like spilling boiling water from a pot towards me, finding pins in my meals, and even trying to push me down the stairs. It was life-threatening. My mother-in-law's family has a long-standing reputation in the retail business, managing a major department store chain, which is currently run by her brother. "Your background is miles apart from mine, you know. I can't blend with someone who grew up in poverty," she says, looking down on me. And then a situation arose that added to my troubles. With a shortage of staff in the hospital, I, a former nurse, would often be called in to help, working alongside my husband, Terry. I noticed something quite unsettling during this time. Terry, being the son of the hospital director, was seen several times reprimanding the nurses in an unreasonable manner. "Move quicker. You're a nurse getting paid, aren't you? Don't slack off just because my father is lenient. Once I take over this hospital, I won't be so forgiving. How many times do I have to tell you? Order the supplies in advance. They're not cheap, you know. Don't take running a hospital lightly." Such unreasonable remarks towards the nurses who are working hard for the patients. "Terry, don't you think that's too harsh? Everyone here is trying their best," I interjected, which he didn't take too kindly. In front of the other nurses, he flew off the handle, furious that I had stood up to him. Since then, Terry became distant towards me. Perhaps it was also influenced by my mother-in-law, who had been telling me from the start that, "You're too soft on your wife. She's taking you for granted." While my father-in-law was still well, he couldn't be openly hostile or abusive in front of him, but then my father-in-law felt seriously ill and became bedridden. When it rains, it pours. My mother-in-law seized the opportunity and made me take care of all the chores, treating me like a housekeeper. I was extremely busy, carrying my son on my back, cooking, doing laundry, and cleaning. Even in front of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law began to mistreat me, but my weakened father-in-law was unable to stop her. "Please don't speak to Lily that way," he would say, to which she would retort, "Here you go again, defending that woman, and you can't even do anything with your frail body. Oh, how I wish you were gone." And she would spew venom at my sick father-in-law. I endured it for the sake of my son and father-in-law. The harassment escalated. "Housekeepers don't eat with the family. Eat the leftovers later." She told me to eat the scraps. I was so upset that I lost my appetite. When I looked in the mirror, I was shocked to see my gaunt and ragged reflection. My husband said, "I only married you because you were a bit attractive, but I never thought you'd become such a shabby woman. I'm too embarrassed to be seen with you," and told me to move from our bedroom to the storeroom. How cruel can people be? My husband and mother-in-law began to verbally abuse even my son. "Of course he's not smart. Look at who his mother is," my mother-in-law would say. "His constant crying is annoying. Make him stop right now," my husband would demand. It felt as if something inside me had snapped. I had made up my mind to run away. My only concern was my father-in-law. If I didn't take care of him, he would be in trouble. However, my father-in-law said, "Don't worry about me, Lily. You should escape to your brother's place." He pulled out several $100 bills from under his pillow and pressed them into my hand. I decided to flee on the spot in the clothes I was wearing. I wrapped my son in my coat to keep him from getting cold. In a hurry, I rushed outside, hailed a taxi with the money my father-in-law had given me, and headed to my grandfather's house. I poured out the whole story to my grandfather and my brother, Derek, all at once. Derek, making a furious face I had never seen before, was shaking his clenched fist. Derek reassured me, saying, "You've had it tough, haven't you? It's okay now, relax." I burst into tears. My grandfather also muttered, "I can't forgive this." A few days later, I left my son with my grandfather and decided to return to my in-laws' house with Derek to collect my belongings. I had left in a hurry without a word, so I thought it would cause trouble if there was any fuss. When we returned to my in-laws' house, my husband muttered with a cold gaze, "You finally returned, huh?" Derek calmly replied, "My sister seems very distressed, so we'll be taking care of her for a while. We came today to collect some of her personal belongings." Then my husband retorted, "I married her, so if she doesn't come back, there will be no one to do the chores. That's a big problem for me." My mother-in-law, looking down on Derek, said, "I heard you do pottery. It must be a poor life, isn't it? Even if you take care of my daughter-in-law, it's going to be tough for you, right? Please send her back. It's a problem for us, too." Derek clenched his fist tightly. I could see that he was desperately trying to suppress his anger. When we asked to take back our belongings, we were directed to a storage room in the corner of the hallway that served as my room. In the corner of the cramped room, where cardboard boxes and old appliances were carelessly placed, there were a few changes of clothes for me and my son. There were no heating appliances, just a thin blanket on a thin mattress. Derek was at a loss for words, seeing the harsh conditions I was living under. When he glared at my mother-in-law, saying, "Is this where you shoved my dear sister and her child?" she retorted, "She should be grateful just to have a room. She's just a housekeeper after all." I wanted to get out of this house as soon as possible, but I was worried about my father-in-law and wanted to see him. My father-in-law, happy to see me again, quietly handed me something. My father-in-law apologized to Derek for not being able to protect me. For several days after that, we made preparations. And then, along with my grandfather and Derek, I headed for my in-laws' house. I was determined to fight for my son. I couldn't keep running away forever. When I arrived home, I handed my husband the divorce papers. He was taken aback for a moment, but then declared he wouldn't pay alimony or child support since I was choosing to leave. I played a recording I had of his mother, my mother-in-law, belittling me and him shouting at me. "This is evidence of the abuse I suffered," I informed them. Both my husband and my mother-in-law looked shocked, asking, "When did you even record this?" It turns out my father-in-law had secretly recorded everything to help me. He had discreetly passed the recording to me when I had gone to collect my things a few days before. My brother, Derek, said I could get a divorce since my husband was at fault. Derek had actually graduated from law school and had passed the bar exam. While assisting our grandfather with his pottery work, he had been actively practicing law to help those in need in our local community. Now he promised to fight for me wholeheartedly. My wheelchair-bound father-in-law showed up and handed the divorce papers to my mother-in-law. He had also recorded all the verbal abuse he had endured and was now ready to divorce as well. Now he can get a divorce himself as well. He preferred living in a care facility over living with my mother-in-law. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law burst into laughter. "I'll gladly divorce you. I'll return to my brother's house and go back to my luxurious life," she said. At that moment, my grandfather was making a call stating, "I'll terminate any contract with a family like this." It turns out the major department store run by my mother-in-law's brother was on the verge of bankruptcy. He had been eagerly trying to strike a deal to exhibit and sell my famous grandfather's pottery and was close to finalizing it. Immediately, a call came from her brother, the department store owner, severing ties. My mother-in-law blanched, muttering, "That's impossible," and sank to her knees. She finally seemed to understand her situation and started to beg. "Please forgive me. I was out of line. I have nowhere else to go. Please let me stay here. Lily, I'm sorry. Please forgive me." There's no way we could forgive her now. We all coldly stared at my weeping mother-in-law. However, just one person still didn't seem to fully grasp the situation. It was my husband who said to me, "I'm set to inherit this hospital. If you want a divorce, I'll pay alimony and child support. I'll marry someone younger and prettier than you." But then my father-in-law said a single sentence. "The hospital has been sold," he declared. His eyes widened in shock. "What?" In fact, Terry, requested by my father-in-law, had been pulling the strings. "Get out of here right now!" my father-in-law screamed at his stepson. My husband's face turned white. My husband was not legally adopted to my father-in-law, who was actually his stepfather. Because of this, he had no legal claim on his stepfather's assets. On the contrary, I was legally adopted by my father-in-law, who had taken good care of me. Sensing the tide of events, my husband quickly changed his tune, pleading for a fresh start with me. I coldly dismissed him. Afterwards, me and my son were doted on and enjoying life at my grandparents' house. He now cried less often. He spent his time playing in nature, finding flowers and insects. My in-laws divorced. The audio tape proved crucial, establishing the fault of my mother-in-law. According to common acquaintances, my mother-in-law and husband are now living at a small rented apartment. Their attempts at finding new jobs haven't gone well, and they seem to be getting by on part-time work. Their days are filled with endless quarrels, each blaming each other for their current situation. My grandfather is living comfortably in a high-end senior home, and my son and I visit him often. Terry, as always, continues to work with pottery under my grandfather's guidance. My mother-in-law's brother, who wasn't at fault, held the pottery exhibition at the department store. At the exhibition, my brother met a lovely woman who has a fondness for pottery, and they've started dating. I expect we'll hear good news from him soon. I work as a nurse at a hospital near my grandfather's house. It was my dream to become a nurse like my mother, and now I find fulfillment in caring for my patients.